Please welcome to the stage Evident's co-CEO and co-founder Alexandra Musavizadeh, Snowflake's head of financial services AI Jonathan Regenstein, PNC's head of data and automation Ned Carroll, EY's financial services AI leader Samir Gupta, and Bloomberg News' Jackie Davalos.
Hard to follow up something like that. Who's ready to settle in for AI architecture? No offense, guys. No, but this is good because now we can kind of get into the meat and potatoes of artificial intelligence. What goes in it, how you put it together, and where it lives. So thankfully, we have folks from every side of that equation, and I'd love to kind of start off with a rudimentary question about what the key inputs are for a successful initiative that leverages artificial intelligence. This can mean a lot of things, but in the financial context, I'd love to start with you, Ned, given you think about kind of the nitty-gritty granular level data that goes into models.
It's a great question. I would start with a value proposition, like actually what are the economics behind what you want to do. I spent the morning talking about customer to account linkages for 19 million customers. So,
translate that for us.
Data.
Yeah.
I think financial services as a whole, all you have to do is read what regulators write about us. We've struggled a little bit with managing structured data, having high quality structured data, whether that's for liquidity reporting, capital reporting, credit risk, what have you. Now, push that onto what's the fidelity and quality of our unstructured data that we want to use. And it's a whole new game, and the types of techniques and tools and practices that we applied to thinking about high quality structured data, some might apply, some might not, and we need to, I think creatively around what those supply chains look like.
Does this new AI era kind of make your job harder or easier when it comes to thinking about how data is structured?
Well, I hate to break the news, but AI is not new. We've been doing modeling and whatnot for a long time. In fact, I think a bit of a good news, bad news story for financial services. On the one hand, we're experts in model risk management. On the other hand, some of our practices around model risk management don't scale and will be difficult to use in a higher velocity class of models. I think it does take a difference. I think a lot of the regulatory focus right now around data quality is a rules-based approach at individual attributes. I think we need to think more around a pattern-based approach and how do we look at data quality across a system of different applications, different models, some of which might be structured, some of which might be unstructured. So it's just a bigger problem set. I think there's a great opportunity to apply AI to how we manage our data a little bit better, and think about how we can be more scalable about that.
Well, then let's hop over to Jonathan. So you think a lot about where data lives. I mean, how are you pitching your customers right now about how they should be thinking about cloud solutions and in AI?
Sure. Yeah. So at Snowflake, as y'all may know, we're a cloud native company. We're a cloud first. So thinking about data in the cloud comes very naturally to us. I've been really pleasantly surprised, encouraged at the tone of this entire day. We've talked a lot about data, a lot about platforms, a lot about de-siloing and governance. We haven't really talked about bringing GPUs in a scalable way to your data, bringing models to your data, but that's all part of the AI story. And this is the exact cloud strategy that we work on with our customers. And to Ned's point, we've been thinking about this motion around structured data for a decade now at Snowflake, right? Now we're starting to append unstructured data to that, all to kind of feed this new world of AI, right? So we're a very cloud-forward company, to say the least, at Snowflake. But I think when we look at how to get value out of AI, you can do it on bare metal. You can kind of build all these systems yourselves. But for our customers who have spent the last 3 years modernizing their data strategy with a cloud strategy, they're ready now to kind of take that next leap with AI. So to us, this appending of structured and unstructured data, the cloud is just the most natural place to do that. So we're really seeing it as an accelerant around data strategy, around architecture, around getting to commercial value. As Ned said, that's always the North Star for everything we do. So kind of data strategy, cloud strategy, now AI strategy. Yeah.
Well, let's head over to Ernst & Young. Samir, give us a sense of how EY is thinking about this, now that we kind of laid the groundwork with what folks need to have in mind on the data and the cloud front.
Yeah. So agree with the points that Ned and Jonathan made. I think there's an overarching point around thinking of AI strategy more holistically. And we look at it from two dimensions. One is how we as EY approach our AI strategy, and then how we see our clients approaching AI strategy, right? And there is a lot to be said in terms of all the various layers of that AI strategy that the banks are thinking about. Some of them are not thinking with the same intensity or the same thoroughness about all the layers. So, the discussion about what should be our data strategy, that's an integral part of what goes into AI, right? Because without having a robust data strategy, you can't go beyond a proof of concept into something that goes into a production environment. There's the element of governance. You guys can hear me okay? There's the element of governance. What we are seeing is that, and we've seen this, when the session happened last year, a lot of the banks said they were just still experimenting, not many use cases have gone into production. Now we hear some of the use cases are going into production, right? So as you think about the strategy in terms of what it takes to have a production environment, what it takes to have an environment in which sensitive data can be co-located with the foundational assets like large language models. If you haven't thought about the strategy for these types of elements in a cohesive way, then you're going to hit a brick wall, right? And I would say there's also the element of governance, which covers so many different aspects, right? Where the AI use cases are residing right now, there are so many layers of approvals needed, so many layers of controls within banks. They are related to things like applications, software. They're related to data and data security and all the additional controls that are needed because of the type of AI that's trying to consume that data. Then there is the traditional model governance. Then there is which is not really suited for a lot of the types of use cases we are looking at today, right? So I would say the single biggest or overarching thing to solve for is a cohesive strategy across all of these dimensions.
Let's talk about some of the challenges that are starting to crop up now that AI is kind of more in the adoption phase. People are starting to incorporate this into their strategies. Ned, I'd love for you to weigh in on this, given you think about this a lot, this idea that you're layering technology on top of each other. And one of the things we had talked about in preparation for this very session is the people, the human talent that goes into that as well. Could you kind of give us an overview of some of the challenges that maybe you've come across, and then where human talent kind of comes into that equation?
So I was visiting my daughter at college last week, and I asked her prospective boyfriend, who's a computer science major, what kind of code generation tools he uses.
That's harsh.
Which, by the way, is exactly not what a 21-year-old daughter wants you to talk to her prospective boyfriend about. But I was asking because I was trying not to be like my dad. Like, I learned this way, and therefore you must learn this way. I walked to school uphill, and therefore you must walk to school uphill. I did process mapping and control testing as an auditor, so you must do it. And I wonder, are we as in corporate America creating an environment where we can really enable the new generation of computer scientists and engineers coming in? On the one hand. On the other hand, we've anecdotally found that the best productivity we get around code generation, as an example, is with our most seasoned engineers. So you're sort of doing the balance of, you want to provide those tools, but you got to wonder what's the learning curriculum, whether it's in higher ed or or when you come in to join a large company, what's that learning curriculum for that new talent? It opens up broader sort of reskilling, of the population in terms of AI. The country went through reskilling with manufacturing, and we thought the answer was everybody goes to college, and now we have $1.6 trillion in college debt. So whatever we did then probably isn't going to be the right solution now. It's a balance.
But there is a friction there between kind of the business and the tech teams that kind of both need to weigh in on these strategies.
That's a great point. So if you're familiar with like large corporate banking, you have a tech team and you have a business team. And the business team gives requirements to the tech team goes off and does them. We're finding instances where the businesses are hiring more technically competent people than technology. And there's a part of large companies that reject that and want to sort of build up those walls more and put process and controls, and ironically use manual controls to control automation. But I think we need to figure out a way around how you really enable co-development between the business and tech. There are important roles for both to play. The business isn't going to care about these unsexy things like resiliency and cyber. Tech needs to. So how do you create that collaboration? It's a very different culture than a lot of large commercial and retail banks. I think banks that have been more focused in capital markets have had that sort of co-development collaboration. So there's probably some good lessons around how do you scale that across a broader footprint.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, like, I remember, I don't know, maybe a year ago, 18 months ago, there was this hypothesis that Gen AI was going to make data scientists and data engineers obsolete. We weren't going to need them. From our perspective, the most successful teams, and we've already heard it discussed today, have a robust talent pool of data scientists and machine learning engineers. So if anything, to me, you should be doubling down on your talent pool right now. If you're going to start putting these really powerful tools into your employees' hands, and you're going to build this robust data strategy, this robust cloud strategy, you're going to onboard all these amazing models, I would say invest at least as much in your talent pools, because you're putting all these tools into the hands of your employees. This is one area I kind of disagree, I think, with the popular narrative that it's the end of data science. I think data scientists are going to be even more valuable, and there's going to be data scientists embedded in every business function across banks. I mean, I don't think you can overinvest in data talent at this juncture. But
do you find that the clients and prospective clients that you're pitching in the financial services field are receptive to that? Or do they kind of just want something that's like plug and play and leave it alone? I have other areas to invest in.
I wouldn't say they're receptive until we start going through a POC to production motion, and we kind of find that optimal mix of a data engineer, a data scientist, a domain expert, a cloud engineer, and we can kind of see, well, when we bring all these things together and then we put large language models in their hands, the results are astounding. And I think this is something that again, Ned touched on. This idea of a structured data strategy and an unstructured data strategy, and how we can use LLMs to give structure to unstructured data. Well, the next stop on that value chain is machine learning engineers and data scientists, right? So it would be a shame to go through all this work with AI of ingesting unstructured data, appending it to your structured data strategy, and then you've kind of underinvested on the machine learning side. So there is definitely resistance to what I'm saying. It's not the popular narrative right now, but the results that we see tend to come from that that mix of talent. So yes, definitely.
Samir, I'm curious if you wanted to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of points to that because, and I think Teresa mentioned in the address this morning about, giving out these tools to 200,000 employees, right? I think what's important is to make a distinction between what is a personal productivity tool, right, which may be not specific to a use case, right, which is being given to an employee to be able to do their basic day-to-day tasks, right, and differentiate that from things that will tend to move towards enterprise applications that have more requirements for, accuracy of the output and robustness of the output and repeatability and so forth. You don't want to have that situation where a couple of years from now, the banks have the same problem as they have with EUC today, where there are 5 to 10,000 EUC assets sitting around, and critical work of the bank is being done in Excel sheets. Now it is the AI equivalent of that, right? And I think it's tied to the talent portion as well. One of the things that I have to do for our financial services business is to bring AI assets and capabilities and training to our entire consulting services, whether they are in business consulting and risk and technology. And while we could roll out licenses to everyone, right, for, let's say, MS 365, but we are deliberately not doing that, right? And I think the reason we are not doing that is that we want to do it in a way that the adoption has a productivity element to it, and it has a stickiness to it, and it is there's a safe way to do that without running amok with the data, right? So defining those personas, being able to say, what are the winning usage patterns, being able to celebrate the wins, being able to incorporate that into the training, doing that in a safe way. All of those things are part of some of the people element of using AI. And again, going back to what I was saying about strategy, having a clear strategy to be able to say, we don't get into an AI-enabled EUC problem, but we have a distinction in terms of what AI asset is being used and what are the, what type of design, what type of technology, what type of controls are being put into it based on the use case.
One of the things I'd love to get into is kind of this uncertainty looming over us when it comes to AI regulation. And in the context of data and infrastructure and cloud solutions, it may seem like a bit too high level of a topic to really trickle down to these things. But there is something to be said about the financial industry and its familiarity with regulation. But in the data context, how does that perhaps pose as an advantage in the with so much uncertainty about what AI regulation could look like if Biden's executive order is scrapped and generative AI firms start to kind of shift around that for the technology that's already out there. Ned, I'd love for you to kind of weigh in on how the regulatory environment that's existed for years for the banking industry kind of prepares AI in that way.
Well, I think, and I've witnessed it for the past, probably 10, 15 years or so, a lot of focus on, can you trust your data, right? So you can now expand that to different data sets. I can't predict what's going to happen or not going to happen. I mean, NIST has come out with frameworks, and Treasury's doing some stuff, and a lot of really interesting work is going on with some industry bodies. I think our focus is really more on, are we doing right for the customer, right? And I think at the end of the day, if we stay focused on can the customer trust the decisions that we're enabling with AI? Can they trust the data? Do we build transparency to how we're using that data? I think it's, as long as we stay customer and client focused, whatever regulatory construct gets put around us will be fine. That's, our focus is around responsibility to our customer, and how we're using their data about them, to help them, succeed in their financial lives. And I think if we stay focused on that, the rest will fall into play with regulations.
How do you think about this over at Snowflake?
Yeah, and I mean, this has been a big focus for us for the last decade, right? Governance and security of your data. And we've been working on that in the structured data realm. Again, we're back to this kind of structured, unstructured data paradigm, which I think is a big mental model shift for us that the world of LLMs has really ushered in. But the best practices around security and governance tend to flow through this mental model shift. So, I mean, at Snowflake, governance and security has always been a huge priority for us. It's a big reason we've built a kind of a data gravity within financial services. So we're just trying to append all those best practices onto unstructured data and onto your AI strategy. And kind of back to what Ned was saying, I mean, if you can trust your data, that is a big step one to trusting the output of an LLM. I mean, there's kind of non-deterministic elements of LLMs that are not going to go away, most likely. But if you can trust your data, that kind of solves a big part of your trust problem. I mean, to regulations specifically, that's definitely top of mind for a lot of our customers, and it's a rapidly changing world right now. But I think that North Star of security, governance, and doing the right thing for your customers tends to get us there.
I mean, one of the things that's been at least messaged by the president-elect's team is that deregulation is probably on the way in some capacity. There's a lot of thinking that, this is an America First strategy, that we need to stay at the forefront of AI versus our adversaries. And I'm just kind of curious if that portends some erosion of what's kind of been put in place over the last couple years, or if there just really isn't that much to go off of. So even if it is scrapped, it doesn't really mean too much of an impact. But on this issue of trust, do you think that with this new incoming administration, that might be more of a question for some of your customers?
Well, I think that the focus on trust for our customers and for banks and insurance companies in particular, that's something that kind of comes from within for them. And it's really, really important. They don't want to, for very good reasons, end up on the front page of the newspaper for all the wrong reasons. So I would say the ability to trust AI, I don't want to say it's almost agnostic to the regulatory environment, because regulations matter, but I think that business risk and business reputation is important enough that they're not going to take their eyes off the ball in terms of trust and in terms of implementing AI the right way. So we're always going to be partnered on that with our customers, and I think that the regulatory environment, it might have a big impact on smaller, more nimble companies like fintechs who are really out there pushing the barriers. But I think this was said in the morning session. We view that there's a big, almost advantage for the larger data estates in this world, and that's inherently an incumbent's advantage. And you don't want to give up that advantage by violating the trust of your customers. So we don't, at least this is my personal opinion, no matter where the regulatory environment goes, I expect trust, security, and governance to be, after commercial value, there's going to be the four things that are always discussed for any POC to production project in AI.
If I can.
Samir, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of points to that. So I think there's a few things that banks recognize, right? As Ned said, that there is a good starting point in terms of experience with enforcing the right level of controls and creating trust in the data. I personally think that whichever direction the Trump administration takes, the fact that many of the banks are operating across geographies, right? So the EU AI Act is not going to change based on what happens in the US, right? So there's some of that conformance to global regulations, right, and also expectations at the state level, right? What happened with CCPA in terms of the amount banks had to shift, right, in compliance with that. But the other part I think it's very important to recognize is that the alpha to be derived from the new AI technologies, right, and especially large language models, lies in the unstructured data, where a lot of the quality issues, a lot of the issues related to things like being able to do even something like anonymizing data, right, are much harder. And that's where I think a lot of the effort is going to go, right, in terms of being able to say, how do you create trust in the data in terms of quality of the data as well as in terms of the controls around that data to be able to propagate things like role-based access controls or just privacy and customer consent in things like this. I think that's where a lot of the effort is going to go in the next at least 1 to 2 years, if not longer, in being able to instill that trust, because if the alpha is going to get derived from the unstructured data, most of the extra effort also needs to be in tackling that part of the problem, which is much harder than the structured data problem.
Alexandra, before we wrap up, wondering if you wanted to chime in here now that we kind of have the lay of the land.
Yeah, lots of things. I mean, just want to get back to the enablers and some of the points that you mentioned on sort of doubling down on talent and actually how important that is, and just some of the observations that we have on the data of the leading banks in the index. But before I go there, just we actually put a piece out, I think it was last year, on the regulation and how actually the banking sector very much is the blueprint, or could be the blueprint for how other sectors, regulated or unregulated sectors, could organize how they adapt for AI-specific risks with the lines of defense and the governance and oversight that's built in already into the banking system. And the thinking of how to adapt those to AI-specific risks is very much something that everyone else is looking at how you're doing this. And so, and to your point, is that you're sort of, because of the trust factor being so important, you can't fuck it up, because then that's that's really detrimental for the business. So getting it right, no matter sort of how slow the regulation moves or how it changes depending on what Trump does and doesn't do on the regulation side, the banks have to keep moving and put use cases through production and sort of think about the oversight and the and sort of how to do that in the best possible way. So regardless of what's going on. But just to go back to the enabling factors, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing on the talent, but also to your point, Ned, on the training and development internally, that is something that we've seen really change, go from 0 to 100, but really rapidly increase. And I think Teresa mentioned it this morning, having 200,000 employees on AI tools. Not only does that require a lot of training and development internally to get that uptake up to where you want it to be, to get those percentages of efficiency gains, but is also what I think that many banks are starting to do with anyone coming into the bank is getting mandatory training. So that this is your AI tool, you've got to try and use it, try and melt it into the processes, in addition to all of the POCs that are being looked at and the sort of very specific, maybe more sophisticated AI use cases. So the training is essential. And in some respects, when we're looking at many of the banks making statements around, what the return on, the number of use cases and the return on investment, a proxy for that, for many, is that looking at who's actually doing and doubling down and doing a really good job on the training and development of that talent, because that is essential. If you don't have that training and development done, it will not be used, and it will not become an absolutely sort of integral part in how everyone in the bank works, thinks, and functions, and that sort of innovative mindset. Just one last point, which is to you, Ned, on the question around getting that expertise down in the lines of business and having that expertise sit not just over in tech or IT, right, but it's part of the whole talent stack. The business and the experts sit alongside, because otherwise you can't figure out, what are the new use cases that are coming, up with Gen AI, but also with agentic AI now. Already, a lot of people are starting to think about what new, things can we do now, and those are happening all the time. So if you don't have that expertise sit in your line of business alongside the business side, then that's going to be much harder to identify, and it's just going to be slower process to get those use cases identified and get into the pipeline.
It's a great discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.